Hello once again, this is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. We've been talking databases and we're in Chapter 2 of SQL, A Beginner's Guide. Chapter 2, which is entitled Working with the SQL Environment, you can see what we talk about in here. Understanding the environment, understanding SQL catalogs, naming objects, creating schemas, and creating databases. In Chapter 1, the author mentions he discussed relational theory, SQL, and relational database management systems, again, from the 30,000-foot view. So it was very general, very generic. In this chapter, the author wants to take it one step further and talk about the SQL environment, which, as it says, provides the structure to which SQL is implemented. Now, this is heavy stuff. I'm going to go over it, but not in a whole heck of a lot of detail. The author has got some pictures in here where he shows components, all right, and then explains some of the major players on the bottom of page 31 and going on, taking up most of page 32. All right. One thing I want to mention in here is they talk about catalogs. And it says a catalog is a group of schemas collected together in a defined namespace. That's a lot of stuff in there, believe it or not. So it's kind of like having a folder in Windows Explorer that has inside of it a lot of other folders and some files. All right. The catalog itself provides some kind of what's called a schema, which has got a description of everything that's inside of it, kind of a how-to or a README file, sort of like. A schema, they mention there, is basically a container for objects, tables, views, and domains, which we're going to talk about in much more depth and breadth of coverage in later chapters. So the author talks here about catalogs and defines a catalog and says that a catalog is a collection of schemas. These schemas taken together provide or define a namespace within the SQL environment. It's a little bit complex, and if you look here, they have a big picture of it. I'm going to have to cut my size down a little bit. But there is a picture that they show in the book in Figure 2.2 on page 33 to give you some kind of an idea of what's going on here. All right. As far as schemas go, and again, we've talked about this already a little bit, and what's mentioned here is each catalog contains one or more schemas. Schema is a set of related objects collected under a common namespace, kind of like put in the same folder, so to speak. The schema acts as a container for objects, which in turn store the SQL data or perform other data-related functionality. Each schema, the objects that are contained in each schema, and the SQL data are owned, as it says, by the authorization identifier associated with that schema. So someone's in charge of it, for lack of better verbiage. You can create your own schema by using create schema. You can drop your existing schema by using drop schema, and you can update your existing schema with update schema. We're not going to worry about any of that. Each catalog, is mentioned here on the bottom of page 34, contains a special kind of schema that's called information schema, which has information about different schema objects, mostly views. Now, the author defines a view there as a virtual table that allows you to view data collected from actual tables. Two things about that. I define a view as a saved query. We haven't gotten into queries yet, but look at it this way. When you talk about views, you're typically in database terminology, you're talking about views of a database. All right? Years ago, I went into a bank that I had money in and I was doing business with, and I wanted to talk to them about possibly getting a loan. All right? And when I went in, I explained to the person, the teller, what I wanted, and they said, oh, you'll have to talk to one of the personal bankers. All right. So I waited a while because there were three of them. They were all busy, and eventually one of them, a younger lady, was not busy. So I went in and I started talking to her. And while I was there, she got a phone call. And she said, "I'm sorry, this is kind of a personal nature, and I want to take it," but she walked away for a couple minutes. All right? Why am I telling you this? Well, while she was walking away, her computer monitor was turned in such a way that I could see most of what was on it. There was a lot of personal information about me in it. Now, that was the view of my data from that personal banker's perspective. Now, a bank teller could not see all that stuff. Typically, the bank teller's view of your data, if you go into a bank, is how much money do you want to deposit, how much money do you want to withdraw, and here's your current balance. But other than that, that's pretty much their view. But a personal banker has a more global view of the data. So as we talk about this with the information schema, views allow different parts or different somethings to have different views of something. There are also schema objects. This gets a little bit complex. So they talk about the objects that you can define inside of schema. Again, I've never had the need to really define a schema because much of that work is done for me automatically. But it's kind of important that you take the time to read about base tables, views, domains, user-defined types, you typically call UDTs, constraints, SQL Server Module, triggers, invoked routines, character sets, collations, transliterations, and sequence generators. Okay? Another one of these, ask the experts. So the author says, okay, we talked about all this. We just went over a bunch of this stuff and your head may be spinning. So exactly what is then a database? It says nowhere in the structure of the SQL environment or the catalogs, nothing that we've seen in this chapter mentions a database. And the reason for that gets mentioned here on the bottom of page 37 is, as far as the SQL 2006 standard is concerned, the term database is never defined. It says, in fact, the only mention of a database in terms of how it might fit into the structure, all right, is that you consider the sites to be a database. All right. So there's a lot more verbiage in here, and believe it or not, there's not too much left in this chapter that I want to go over. I do want to take a minute and jump all the way up to page 40. And on page 40, they talk about name objects in an SQL environment. And we're talking here a little bit about things that you name. So these are user-defined things. Might be the name of a table, might be the name of a field, might be the name of a view, etc. Well, when you define your own stuff, you have to use what are called regular identifiers. And this is more stuff that's generic and general about SQL. SQL, most of it at least, and all the stuff we're doing, if you're working under Windows at least, is case insensitive. So if you've got something called artist names, it can be in all lowercase, it can be in all uppercase, it can be in mixed case. But as they say, artist names like this is identical to artist names like this, which is identical to artist names like this, etc. Your identifiers, you can only use letters, digits, and the underscore character. All right? There's letters only with an underscore, there's letters and digits, and again, there's letters with an underscore. You also cannot use reserved or keywords. Okay? And I'm on page 59, but I'm going to jump all the way up to about page 522. And that was a little too far. So here are your SQL reserved words, starting on page 492. I don't know how many there are, but right there must be a good, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's a good 65 or so here. There's probably about 100, if not more, here. And there are yet some more here. All right, so there's probably upwards of 150 regular keywords in there. Just so you know, when they say that you can't name your identifier one of those keywords, that's what they're talking about. All right, jumping down to the bottom of page 41 here, they talk about qualified names. So, looking at the example that we looked at in the previous chapter right here, okay? If I want to use a qualified name, let me get rid of this stuff right there. I could say, for example, employee dot employee supervisor. That is a fully qualified name because it has the name of the database followed by a period followed by the name of the field. So when they talk fully qualified names, that's pretty much what the author is talking about there. All right, the last part of the chapter, starting on page 44, they give you the syntax here for creating a database schema. And on page 44, the author does the same thing, gives you the syntax for creating a database. Okay? And then he has you close out the chapter by actually doing a step-by-step type of exercise where you set up a database. That's pretty much it. Like I said, that's it for Chapter 2. In the next chapter, we will jump back into looking at some actual SQL code because it's on creating and altering tables. So I'll be back with that shortly.